my Eagles fix, and I called my favorite reporter. Let's go to the Toms River Volkswagen Sports Hotline and welcome into the locker room. He's a beat writer for the Eagle, covering the Eagles in the Philadelphia Daily News. Let's welcome in Les Bowen to the locker room. What's up, Les?
Hey, how are you?
Les, I'm doing great. The beginning of the show is a little tense, a little nervous, a little frustrated with my 76ers, but then I knew we were going to be talking about the Eagles, and I still have such a good feeling that, Les, we washed away all that negativity. We won the Super Bowl.
Yep, and the Eagles didn't blow a 22-point second.
Even Les is getting on them. Boom. Les.
That was just. I know you want to talk about the Eagles, but that was just. I don't think anybody that watched that got to sleep easily.
No, I agree with you 100%. I mean, I was telling Josh.
Kick the TV.
Yeah, I was screaming at the TV. I mean, how do you Les? Before we start talking about the Eagles, don't you think Brett Brown should have called a timeout there and trying to stop the bleeding?
Of course, I understand this Phil Jackson philosophy, but they're not Jordan and Pippen and those guys.
Exactly.
They had like 4 or 5 straight possessions where they got off ridiculous shots. They couldn't get back to the other end. They gave away like 10 points of that lead just on stupidity, not anything the Celtics were doing.
Exactly.
He had to get them organized, get a play run, get somebody out of there and somebody else in, take control of the situation. And he just didn't seem to want to do that. And his counter is that they learned some great lesson. I'm not sure what that lesson is supposed to be. But
well, you're not supposed to learn lessons like that in the playoffs.
So who knows?
No, but Les, I value your opinion on all sports. And what lesson did they learn? Here's the lesson they learned: they lost Game 2, a game they should have won. Even the Celtics coach Brad Stevens says they got away with one.
Yeah.
All right, let's turn our attention to the Eagles, Les, because I read the Daily News. I get it delivered to my house. I love reading your articles, and I'm worried. How worried should we be about Tim Jernigan? Because listen, I had back surgery. I had 3 herniated discs in my neck that I had. So I got a big zipper in the back of my neck. And how concerned are the Eagles, and are you with this Jernigan situation?
Yeah, it's mildly to moderately concerning, I would say. It came up in off-season training, apparently, which I think is one of the things that tends to happen the year after you play into February and go to the Super Bowl, is guys try to get back into it, and their bodies are pretty beat down, from the long season. And I think you tend to have more stuff like this happen to you. But in terms of level of concern, I mean, it's tough for Tim, and I don't know how well he's going to recover from this. A lot will depend on his attitude toward the rehab, I think. But from the team perspective, I think they're in pretty good shape. They signed Haloti Ngata. They still have a couple guys like Destiny Vio and Elijah Qualls, whom they drafted last year and barely let on the field. Those guys are going to step up a little bit. They can certainly move Michael Bennett inside on run as well as passing downs, I think. I mean, he's not quite what he used to be when he was one of the most dominant defensive players in the league, but I think he can still, fill the gap in there. It's interesting, though. A year ago, this happened to Bo Allen in training. He tore a pec tendon.
Right.
And they were just about to sign Bo Allen to a long-term contract when this happened. Bo got no contract, and they traded for Tim Jernigan. And they signed Tim Jernigan to a long-term contract. Bo is now in Tampa, and the Eagles have an injured Tim Jernigan. It's weird.
And they had to rework his contract, right, Les?
Yeah, they certainly did. And this is one of the things about the NFL that's different from any other league. You just couldn't go to anybody in the NBA or Major League Baseball or the NHL and say, hey, you hurt yourself. Okay, we want some of the money back.
Yeah. That's got to make – that can't make Jernigan happy.
Back, but they basically just canceled the guarantees after this year. He has to prove that he's going to be worth $11 million next year, which is going to be a steep hill for him to climb if he doesn't start the season on time. But
Les, you think this will leave a sour taste in his mouth towards the Eagles organization? I mean, I know he signed it, but I was just telling you that Josh, he can't be happy about
in
that.
the NFL. I don't think I'm sure he's not happy about it, but this happens so much in the NFL. With guys who aren't superstars. I remember when the Eagles were in the Super Bowl the last time. Around that time, they did the same thing to Hollis Thomas.
Right.
It's just it's something they can do, and they do it. And I think it's something the Players Association ought to be a lot more concerned about in the next round of bargaining talks than they have been previously. But anyway, that's probably.
And you mentioned in your article, Les. You mentioned in your article that Jernigan played 48% of the snaps, which they got that rotation system in there. So I mean, but he was a big part of their defensive unit. He played really well last year.
Well, it's funny. He did for most of the year, but you could make the point that after that he got that contract, he did not play as well. Now, I don't know if that was he was playing for the contract or he's really, for a guy who plays a physical style, he's kind of a small defensive tackle, and he might have just worn down naturally, whether he had the contract or not. But he really didn't. Down the stretch, he was not the same guy, and in the playoffs, he was not the same guy. He was okay. He didn't make any real momentum-changing plays as he had done earlier in the season. So it's kind of hard to assess his, if Holy Nada is as good as he was before he got hurt last year with Detroit, I think they'll be just fine. But, it adds a layer of uncertainty to a situation that already has several layers of uncertainty hovering around it.
We're talking with Les Bowen, beat writer, covers the Eagles for the Philadelphia Daily News. And Les, you're down there at the NovaCare facility. A lot of players still in and around here. They're getting ready for their mini camp coming up.
Oh yeah. I think people are very, especially with a short off season like this. I think people are on the facility now. They only let us in on certain occasions when people are talking, so we can't just go down there and hang out. But they do have a rookie minicamp coming up at the end of this coming week, and we'll get to talk to some people then. And, there's things are starting to ramp up. They've been doing on-field work. This is phase 2 of the off-season program. The Eagles released some photos the other day, like Darren Sproles in uniform and so forth, So, behind the scenes, it is getting cranked up again, and July will be here before we know it.
Hey, Les, how different of an atmosphere is it in and around the locker room and when you get over there? How different is the atmosphere this year compared to last year?
I think it's going to be like something we've never really experienced.
Right.
I mean, that, they won the Super Bowl, and there's just this, they want to get back, but there's not anything hanging over their head, any negative vibe of any sort. I guess one of the main tricky parts of the vibe is going to be that they have about a half dozen prominent guys like Carson Wentz and Jason Peters who didn't play in the Super Bowl and are acutely aware of that and have a real motivation to make the Eagles probably the first make the Eagles the first team in 14 years to repeat as a Super Bowl champion, because they didn't really get to do the whole thing last year. So that's an interesting element. A lot of the guys, a lot of the team's leadership, Jordan Hicks, is in that category of, well, I have a ring, but I wasn't really around for the playoffs.
Right.
Yeah. So that'll be an interesting wrinkle to the offseason. I think that might help the Eagles quite a bit get over the kind of hangover that Super Bowl teams have. There is a good reason, I think, why nobody repeats. It's just really hard to do that again.
Everybody's trying to knock you off, man. That's for sure.
Oh, man. That's another. I talked to a lot of, when I went out to the draft in Dallas, they have a luncheon there with the NFL Network analysts. And one of the things I was asking these guys is, why is it so hard? Obviously it is hard to repeat. And there were several elements to it, but the biggest one that people kept coming back to was that you've never had this level of teams preparing for you before. Your divisional opponents always prepare for you a lot and know you well. But you're going to be playing AFC teams that, they know they're playing the defending Super Bowl champions. They're going to load up on the film, on the, it's going to be a special game for them, whereas normally it wouldn't be.
Right, because a lot of the games lesser on prime time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Every week is going to be some team's biggest game, because they're playing the defending Super Bowl champions. And we've never seen that. We've never experienced that before. And it'll be real interesting to see how the team responds.
We're talking with Les Bowen of Philadelphia Daily News. Les, you said you were down at the draft. How did Dallas do compared to how Philadelphia did with their draft?
It was very different. They did a good job. The atmosphere wasn't nearly as intense. It wasn't as soulful, as heartfelt, I don't think. They had it, first of all, they didn't really have it in Dallas. They had it around the Jerry Dome in Arlington.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of stuff. I mean, there were all kinds of exhibits and games and things. It was like the county fair. It was all over the place in all these parking lots. But you're in parking lots.
Right.
It's not Ben Franklin Parkway. There's no art museum. And then the draft itself was inside the stadium. And I had envisioned, okay, they're going to try to fill up the stadium with people, and make it really loud. But they really didn't do that. It was kind of focused toward one end of the stadium, and they had it kind of blocked off. Like the 1/3 of the stadium was like blocked off, and then they had people in the other 2/3. But it wasn't extraordinarily raucous, or I don't think the Cowboys fans were all that fired up. They certainly didn't have a great year last year.
And I heard there were reports that they left after their pick. They didn't even stay.
Yeah, it just wasn't. It was a real kind of laid back thing. It was nice. There wasn't anything wrong with it, but it didn't compare to what Philadelphia did. But what Philadelphia did, and Philadelphia did such an amazing job with it that now everybody wants the draft. Every city in the league wants the draft. Nashville wants the draft. L.A. wants the draft. The Hall of Fame people in Canton, Ohio, want to host the draft. It makes it hard to get it back. For years, nobody wanted it. They just had it in Radio City, and everybody kind of thought, well, that's that. But now it's like a traveling attraction, and you're going to see a draft, in Green Bay, and then God knows where.
Hey, Les, what were some of your takeaways about what Howie Roseman and Joe Douglas and the team did on the 3 days of the draft? Obviously, they traded out of the first round. They jumped ahead of the Cowboys to get a tight end. They walked away with some very interesting additions to the roster.
Yeah, it was a bad situation. They did not have many picks. They had 32. When they went into the draft, they had 32, and then they didn't pick again till 130. And that was the biggest, I looked it up, and the Eagles hadn't had fewer than 2 picks in the top 125 since 1977.
Wow.
That's really sparse. I think they did okay with it. One thing I should have mentioned when we were talking about Tim Jernigan is that they knew about this injury. We didn't know about it, but they did going into the draft. And they did not draft a defensive tackle in a pretty deep defensive tackle draft. So that tells me that they aren't panicky about this, that they aren't going to go out tomorrow and trade some valuable asset for a defensive tackle or anything like that. They clearly think they have people that can do this. But yeah, I thought they needed the tight end thing was an important thing to nail down. A good young tight end who can stay under Zach Ertz, who can try to do a lot of the things Trey Burton did last season. That was a good thing to do with their first pick. After that, it was kind of I didn't really expect a corner. They could certainly, with Patrick Robinson leaving, they can find room for a slot corner like Maddox, but that wasn't on the. If you were doing it by priorities, which you should never do, you should never draft that way. You take the best players, especially when you're defending Super Bowl champions. But I would have expected an offensive tackle. I would have expected a safety at some point. But it's interesting. They haven't really released the names of all of the undrafted guys they signed. We're going to see that at the end of the week when they have the rookie camp. But I understand they've got 4 safeties in there that they signed, which is not a surprise at all. Right now, they don't have a real safety.
You there, Les?
Yes, I'm still here, yes.
Les, one more quick question for you, and that is just kind of overall perspective on the draft, the free agent period. A lot of times teams, when they win the Super Bowl, the teams get worse. They don't actually try. They're not able to improve the roster because of financial limitations, because of guys just wanting to go out and get their money. Do you think that Howie Roseman has done a good job at making sure this team doesn't take a step backwards?
Yeah, I do. I mean, we won't know until they play the games, but certainly free agent signings like Bennett and Nada, those were good, and some of the other guys, too, were pretty good, solid pickups on the veteran free agent market. They didn't have a lot of money to spend. They couldn't go out and, get a top-tier free agent. Within the constraints, the draft, as we just discussed, they had traded picks away to win the Super Bowl, to get Carson Wentz and Jay Ajayi and Tim Jernigan and, some of these other people in here, so Ronald Darby. So, that's the price you pay. But they haven't had a terrible offseason. They had a little bit of a free agent exodus with Pat Robinson and Bo Allen and Trey Burton, but those weren't, oh my gosh, how are we going to replace this guy kind of players? They were good players. I think 1 or 2 of them is probably going to end up getting overpaid, which is what happens.
Which always happens.
Free agents in the Super Bowl, But, I think they've had a good offseason, and I think, again, with all the guys coming back that weren't even in the playoffs, I think they look like at least as good a team coming into this season.
Well, let's hope so, Les. I really appreciate you giving us a few minutes here on a Saturday morning in May, and look to follow you in the Philadelphia Daily News with your reporting on the Eagles.
Well, thank you very much, guys, and good to talk to you.
All right, Les Bowen, everybody, of the Philadelphia Daily News on the Toms River Volkswagen Sports Hotline.